You are just getting into landscape photography, or you're doing it for a while, but somehow you're thinking, I'm not really getting it the way I wanted to, or you don't get the response you want to from your viewers. My name is Philip from let'simage.com, and I made all the landscape photography mistakes you could possibly imagine. And I still do sometimes. So let's go over 10 landscape photography mistakes that I did and still do, using my own images so that you don't have to make those mistakes. I'm not afraid to admit that I'm making mistakes, but the important part is that we keep learning from them. Let's jump in. Number 10, reading too much or overstudying. When I started out, I spent days and days learning about how the camera works, which settings to use in which situation, how to set up a tripod, how to edit in different softwares, but I never actually went out and practiced anything. When I then did go out, I realized, well, crap, I actually don't remember anything because I just learned too much, but ultimately if you don't train it, you're not going to retain anything. I didn't solidify what I had learned. Don't be a me. If you're just now getting into landscape photography, sure, read about it, but also practice what you read. If you're learning about shutter speed, maybe get out there and take images in low light situations. Or if you're learning about astrophotography, actually get out there and take an image of that giant Milky Way that seems to elude me. That is the only way to properly solidify what you have learned. Moving on to mistake number 9, which is shooting mode. First things first, unless you really have to, do not shoot in auto mode. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but I don't recommend it. In the best case, you're gonna have more work when it comes to editing to correct things like temperature or whatever. But in the worst case, that actually will destroy your shots. Because maybe the focus was off, or maybe it doesn't get the exposure to where you want it to. I also wouldn't personally recommend to shoot in manual mode, and I know this is going to be dividing a little bit. But damn, that is a lot of settings to change all the time you're changing scenery. If you're on a hike, right, and you're hiking over this beautiful mountain and you take pictures from the valley beneath, but also from the plants on the left-hand side, or maybe you're diving into a cave on the side or whatever, and you all do this within a couple of hours as you move along, now that would be a lot of settings to change. I recommend choosing aperture priority mode. This way you know exactly what is in focus and you can simply adjust the shutter speed using the exposure compensation, which is the little dial on the top of your camera. You can jump from scene to scene, change 1 or 2 settings at a time, but always be sure whatever is in focus is in focus. So with keeping an eye on your depth of field as well as on your histogram, just to make sure we're not over or underexposing, at least not by a lot, should be totally fine. It should also be totally fine to hit that thumbs up button as well as that subscribe button. Worst plug ever, but there you go, it's YouTube. Now, this brings me to number 8, which is not understanding your camera properly. After you learn what the buttons do on your camera, make sure you try to understand the exposure triangle as best as possible, which is aperture, shutter speed, and ISO or ISO. The amount of times that I blew out a sky is... check it out. Apart from the composition being weird, there is basically nothing in the sky. And back then I couldn't hide that with editing either. Even the main subject is partly blown out, which basically is a catastrophe. Granted, nowadays I drifted into HDR photography where exposure is less of a concern for me, but for anyone taking single images you need to make sure the information are in the image because otherwise you can't work with them later. So get the exposure triangle down and get to know the buttons on your camera. It's going to be faster, it's going to be more efficient and also more fun if you don't have to fiddle all the time. I'll link an article of myself in the description of this video if you want to take a look and get that done 10-15 minutes. To practice afterwards. Practice, practice, practice. Moving on to number 7, which is the stop and shoot. Now tell me if this sounds familiar. You arrive at a scene, it's a beautiful scenery, you lift your camera, you take a shot, and you move on. That is the stop and shoot. Good? Bad. Next time you do this, have a look around and check if maybe going higher or lower is going to give you an angle that's more beneficial to that scenery. Like for example in this photo right here, which is from Italy, and I walked along the path but actually looked around, there's some vantage point that I can actually use to change perspective and just make it a bit nicer. Or this one here, because instead of just pointing at the roots and then the bench in the background from a standing position, I went all the way down to get a much better visual effect here. Similar to this one, because getting up close to the footsteps really made for a much better composition rather than just pointing and shooting. So why not get low or high next time you're out shooting? Giggity. Coming up to number 6, which is the right time of the day. Now this is where I might divide opinions a little bit, but usually it is said that unless your scene has something amazing in it, don't shoot in the middle of the day when there are no clouds. Shadows are going to be very, very harsh, highlights are going to be very, very bright, and the viewer's response is normally better if you have sunset or sunrise images or blue hour or whatever, around that time. So the advice would obviously be to go out before sunset or sunrise or whatever and shoot then, right? Yes, generally if you can. If you can, try to aim for that. However, it does depend a little bit on your traveling style as well as on your kind of photography. I am often moving more on the fantastical side of editing. So for example, check out this image right here in Egypt. This was taken in the middle of the day, there are no clouds in the sky and the light was relatively terrible. But as I love editing, and I do it a lot, I just create something else to create interest in the image. Especially if the natural light is not on my side. Or this image right here. I also took at the middle of the day. But if sun creates hard shadows, then a moon would certainly do something similar, no? Cool then, let's create a night image. Because we can. There might also be scenarios where you don't have to care much about light, like here for example. I was in Japan, this is early in the morning, but I'm in a bamboo forest, so I don't give a crap about the light. And also, not to forget, sometimes harsh light even adds to an image. Like here in this scenery, again from Italy, where I actually like the harsh shadows. So it is solid advice to try to plan your amazing shots, let's say, around sunset or sunrise or blue hour. But don't let that take away from other amazing opportunities you have by just going out anytime. I certainly don't, and I'm shooting any time of the day, because you never know what you want to do with it afterwards. Sue me. Going to number 5, which is composition. And I can only assume you were waiting for that one. Now the aim of a photo ideally is to draw the viewer in, as best as possible at least. So check this out. Do you feel drawn yet? Probably not. See, I thought I was very clever here, because this ramp leads the eye of the viewer straight into the water. But that's it. I remember being there, I remember the rough sea, the smells and all the feeling in general, but a viewer doesn't have that. A viewer only has my snapshot of my memory basically. If I don't give the viewer something to be drawn in, the eyes are just going to bounce around a little bit and then the viewer is going to abandon the image. Most naturally, a viewer's eye will either go to the brightest point of your image, whatever that might be, or if that's not really a thing because everything is equally saturated, then it's going to go to the most saturated area. But that's it, it's going to go there and go away. So instead, we have to look around and create interest in our image. For example, check this out. We've seen this picture, but see how the path clearly leads the eye into the image and up to the brightest point, the canopy? Or this one from Utah. Here, the tree leads the eye naturally up the waterfall into the brightest area in the image. Now, of course, sometimes you don't have leading lines, but you can still use simple rules of composition to create interest in your image, like the rule of thirds. In this one, for example, which is also in Japan, I made sure that the subject is on one of the corner points of that rule overlay. The repeating torii gates that get smaller in the distance also create a sense of space, which is amazing. Now, as always, of course you can crop in post when you start editing, but if you don't take at least a little bit of care when it comes to your composition, you might have to crop a lot and therefore lose information in the photo. Talking about quality information. Or, in the worst case, you might come home later and realize, well, a broken composition can rarely be fixed in post. Coming up to mistake number 4, which is image edges. Do not forget your edges. In landscape photography, what is not in your image is equally as important as what is. Have a look at this image, for example. This is from Utah, and while the image does have some other issues, one of the one that annoys me right now is that I didn't take care of the edge. So now I have things on the right-hand side here poking into my image. Or here in this photo, I have not one, but 2 rock formations peeking into my image. Or in this hyper-edited image. This tree here is super close to the edge and even crosses it. If someone looks at your photos and there are many elements either very close to the edge or even crossing the edge outside of the frame basically, then they are distracting, and if people look at them, they may abandon your image straight away after. If you can, keep your edges clean, try to think about that before you actually take the shot, and give your viewer a nice, calm, edge-free image. Getting towards the top 3 with the what now? The what now? So let's stick with this image actually. What am I trying to showcase here? Hell if I know. Especially with this kind of editing, the image is super busy. But am I showing the house? Am I showing the river? Am I showing the trees? I don't know what the focus point is here. Sometimes it can make sense to have a busy scene, for example in city photography like this one. But landscapes often benefit from a clear focus on something, or at least keeping the photo as simple as possible. For example, this one right here. There's barely anything in the image, but it still works because that cloud is weird and clearly what I focus on. It's not the viewer's job to try to identify what you want to show them. It's our job as the photographer to try to tell that story with the composition that we create. So try to keep your images simple and try to focus on something that kind of makes sense simply. And don't be a me, as you have seen. Don't do that. Moving up to mistake number 2, it's getting close to number 1, which is, you think you can fix it in post? So I am an avid user of Photoshop and I often edit the hell out of my photos because I love that part. But I learned the hard way, not everything can be fixed in post. Check it out. I took this shot in Bavaria and even realized that the lineup isn't great. If I would have stepped maybe 20 meters to the right, I would have lined up that mountain with that area and could have zoomed in for a great composition. But I, somehow stupid for a hot moment, thought that I can fix it in post. Generally, fixing these kind of compositional mistakes is impossible in Photoshop, unless of course you are a composite editor. Then you can fix anything by just, putting random images together. That works. But if you're not, you can fix many things. You can remove smaller objects, you can remove dust spots, you can adjust the colors. Hell, you can even turn day to night if you want. But composition, once things aren't lined up, it's kind of over. So next time you're thinking, I can fix that in post, think, do you know how? And if the answer is even remotely related to no, just fix it in real life. It's easier. And the number one mistake that you see all the time, especially on the good old interwebs, is editing, or specifically over-editing. Look, I did it. Check this out. Oh yeah. Or this. Oh, it gets worse. Oh yeah. Don't get me wrong, there is a market for basically every kind of photography. But especially beginners tend to go a little overboard with the editing that they do. Don't over-sharpen, it'll look unnatural. Don't over-color, it'll look like a unicorn couldn't find the bathroom. Anyway, you get the idea. So my advice is when you are done editing, once you have completed everything, first of all, step away from your computer and come back 15 minutes later because your eyes get used to the amount of colors that you're looking at. And second, once you're completely done, simply compare it. Head to the internet and maybe find a photo of your most favorite photographer, somebody that inspires you, and something that you would like to recreate maybe even, and just simply check if your saturation scale is maybe 5 billion points over what you can see on the internet, in which case, most likely you're a little bit over what you should consider a natural edit. Unless, of course, that's what you're going for. Go for it. So, in general, trying to keep your editing as natural as possible and simply compare it to others to see if you went a little bit overboard here and there. And here's a little bonus mistake, so to speak, that I do all the time, which is try to still have fun. Sometimes a shoot simply doesn't work for many reasons, and that's okay. Remember that you're doing this because you like it. And if a shoot doesn't work out, stop. Enjoy the moment of being there instead and move on. Or have a drink, which is what I usually do. Don't get stuck and frustrated and trying to get that one shot that somehow for the last 3 hours didn't work. It might just not be that particular spot that works for that day. Cool. Sometimes things are outside of our control, and that's okay. And there we go. These were 10 + 1 landscape photography mistakes that I made in the past and I still make every now and again. Keep in mind, these mistakes are just my opinion, so keep the hatred down in the comments if we can. Now, let me know what other things ruffle your feathers, other landscape photography mistakes that you see other people make that maybe should be covered in a video as well. Other than that, until next time, stay safe, and I shall see you then. Have a good one. Bye!